independent film, of course, has nearly died in terms of there actually being a market for it.
I made a documentary a few years back, and it was about the end of the video store era and the decline of physical media.
The last blockbuster video in the United States.
It opened up a can of worms that I think resonates throughout the history of film. Filmmaking is a freedom of speech issue.
And you have very few people who will buck that system.
The ambition is what matters, that the heart is there.
And films have been censored throughout history in various ways.
That film, which was his first film, destroyed his career.
And controversy is really what makes a movie survive.
There was no streaming service that would even stream us.
They just decided to start pulling content. We're not in control of our destinies, they are.
All the rules that prevent monopoly and encourage competition have gone away.
You should be able to turn a profit.
You did.
Someone stole it.
Somewhere along the 120-year plus history of film, people realized that movies had the ability to sculpt society in a way that was even more potent than the written word. And people have been trying to control it ever since.
So hi everybody, this is Ben here from Spirit of Independence. I'm delighted to be joined stateside from New York. We've got Tom Seymour, the director of VHS Massacre, and VHS Massacre 2 is one of the films that we're going to be screening at the festival this year. So Tom, if you can just kind of briefly introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your background so people kind of get to know you before we dive into some questions.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, well, thanks for having me, first of all. I started out making films on Super 8 and VHS. And, you know, I did that since I was probably in grade school, and I've never stopped. And so I guess some of the highlights are I started out actually as a CBS news cutter, and then, but I always made films. And so, I've done narratives and documentaries and things like that, but I think the VHS Massacre documentaries, I think those are some of the most successful features I've done. And those are about the video store era and whatnot, and exploitation, the American exploitation film movement. And yeah, so I've just sort of been at it for a couple decades, and it's kind of compulsive. Sometimes I don't know why I keep making films. God knows I don't make any money. But, you know, it's, in a way, I think I've turned a corner because I started working with Troma, and I grew up watching Troma. So it's actually, it feels like a victory to sort of be working with Troma.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably come back to the Troma stuff. I think for a lot of the viewers who maybe haven't seen the first VHS Massacre and are coming into this, might want to catch it on Prime before they see the second one. Can you kind of set the scene for us with I guess, the two films?
Yeah, well, the first one had a lot more to do with the decline of physical media. And I think we started in early 2012. And in New York, you saw a lot of like these tentpole video stores, these independent film video stores going under. Like Kim's Video in New York was like it was staple of New York. It was almost like a tourist attraction, you know. Mm-hmm. And they started to go under, not because of lack of sales, but because of the landlords just kept raising the rent. And so you had a situation where you know, the last Blockbuster in New York City went out of business. So it was, you could say the timing was great in a very sad way. For the first one, because you saw all these video stores going out of business. But really, it by the end of the documentary, it was talking about, at the time, there was very little money in streaming for exploitation and low-budget indies. And that's sort of how the last one, the first film was left. And so VHS Massacre 2 picks up from there. but then focuses more on exploitation, because it is a type of film that seems to be under a particular type of scrutiny, and the video store reflects it very much. Like, you had the mom and pop video stores; they would carry movies that the major chains would not carry. So these movies like Faces of Death, or maybe Maniac Cop, or some of the trauma stuff, a small store might carry if the owner was like serious about like what kind of cult movies and horror movies they might have. But that, in the United States, Blockbuster was essentially designed to destroy independent franchises. Like, they worked directly with the studios. They paid no money for their copies of the movies, and they split the revenue directly with the studios. So they were like kind of installed. They started out independent, but that went away fast. And so that reflects with the contemporary streaming, because a lot of exploitations films have been pushed out of major streaming sites for vague reasons that didn't make sense. Amazon Prime in 2018 deleted thousands and thousands of independent films for what they described as quality standards, but there was no consistency, and there was no ability to reload. Like, let's say you had a master you could go back to and remaster the whole film because it was a quality problem, and then you could re-upload. Well, what happened was those films that got pulled were permanently banned. And now more than ever, you're seeing the same thing on YouTube. Trauma's YouTube channel was suspended for like a month, and they said it was some kind of community standard thing. And you just get to a point where you worry. There's only a handful of media companies, and they really are going to have a say as to what appears on certain streaming sites. And Joe Bob Briggs, from the documentary, has said essentially you're going to see censorship mostly through omission, I believe the way he put it. These films are just going to slowly be removed from streaming services, and it's disturbing. So then again, that's why the physical media is more important than ever. Blu-ray seems to be the last stand of the physical media market, although VHS has had its own comeback.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. You kind of touched on some of the points I wanted to talk to you about there, and what the Netflix and that's so funny what you're saying about Prime, because there is so much trash on Prime. It's amazing that they got rid of all this stuff, because you only need to look 5 seconds into a search function, you can find some trash.
Exactly, yeah.
It reminds me of, and I don't know if you've kind of studied this at all, but the vertical integration that the studio systems had in the 40s and 50s, where they had control of production, distribution, and exhibition. So essentially, they just totally controlled everything that was made and everything that you'd end up seeing.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're kind of getting back to that at all. I don't know if that's something that you feel as well.
Yeah, I mean that's a fact. That in the United States, that was broken up, I believe, at the end of the 50s, early 60s. Yeah. That was deemed, I guess, illegal. It was some kind of antitrust monopoly situation. But slowly over the decades, that stuff's been reestablished. And I hate to say, in the United States, Reagan started passing some of that legislation, and then Clinton was a huge part of basically removing monopoly laws. So a lot of people sort of didn't realize it till years later. Like, wait, he did what? Like, so you get a situation with, what is it, AT&T, Time Warner Cable? Like, how much can you own? You own the literally the wires that come into the house, the programming, the total infrastructure. It's out of control, really.
It is, and obviously that kind of limits where indie filmmakers, I guess, can end up now, because unless you started off on that path right at the beginning, you're going to struggle to get anywhere. But kind of going back to the documentary in particular, and I just want to kind of touch upon your style, because what was interesting about the way the documentary worked was your style felt very organic in that, and in particular in the first one, you were almost filming yourself talking about, I'm going to go out and make this documentary. And then that footage of you talking about making the documentary ends up in the documentary. So did you kind of go out with the ethos of, I'm just going to go out and film stuff and see what happens and see where it takes us, and we'll put it together and see what we end up with?
Yeah, in the first one, absolutely, that was true. Like there were events that were happening, but in regard to what would end up on camera was a total mystery. And then there are things that we shot that we're like, this is gold, and then you cut it down and there's nothing there. So yeah, it was a lot of experimenting. The first VHS Massacre was my first feature-length doc. I had done narratives before that, and so it was a lot of experimenting. So yeah, in the VHS Massacre was sort of like this. We found all these random VHS tapes, and then we watched them in sort of a party, and that was at the very end when we figured out, like, what are we going to do with this stuff? Like we had to have an ending to the doc, so it was very reflexive in that way. It's, sort of, like you said, very, I guess, self-aware.
Yeah. And so what was the approach for the second one that I guess differed from the first one? Did you have a bit more of a clear mindset at the beginning about, this is a narrative route I want to go down?
Yeah, it was absolutely, it was a lot more focused. There was just a lot more specific things, and in a way you could say the first one was reflective of what was going on. It was chaos. The video stores were closing, streaming hadn't taken hold, so maybe the first one was reflective of actually how chaotic it was. The second one, you realize streaming is taking hold, but it's totally controlled. Every profitable arena is controlled. And so the weird thing is, I never worry that there's not going to be exploitation films. I never worry that there's not going to be low budget indies. The problem is they've removed any ability to make money. And that's a serious problem, because it means none of those people can gain a foothold and keep making larger and larger films. And
And I guess that was the beauty of VHS back in the day, wasn't it? Because it just allowed anybody who could essentially go out and make a film, because all these video stores, all we wanted was content just to fill out the shelves. And you had this massive boom of films. But then it obviously, part of the problem with that is that it eventually all these films get whittled away, because as VHS dies, there's only so many of those VHS films that will make it onto DVD, and then same again for DVD. So where do we kind of end up? And where we probably end up is the streaming sites will hold kind of the canon of films, because everything else will be kind of dead or obsolete, and we won't be able to get hold of it anymore.
Yeah, and you see how petty they are. You see, especially with the licensing, you see a specific film, it's on this platform for 1 year. Yeah. It's on this platform for another year. I had, admittedly, I bought my own film on Prime. It was a movie called London Betty, and I just wanted it in my permanent library just to have it like accessible. And that was one of the thousands of movies they deleted. And so I had to call up and say, you guys deleted movies out of my permanent library.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane. And they eventually restored it, but there are, I would assume, hundreds of thousands of people who maybe didn't even notice some of the films that they bought from their permanent library were deleted. Like, so you're getting into a space, like, you realize that when you buy something on Prime or anywhere, you know it's a license, you don't really own it, but they really could delete it at any time, so it's just frightening.
It is, and that defeats. You would think that that would be counterintuitive to what they're trying to promote. The whole fact of this is digital, this is yours, you can build it, create it how you want. You know, all these things about creating lists. Well, that's only good if you keep everything on, but obviously,
yeah,
they don't.
Yeah, watch it anytime, anywhere. Unless we decide we're going to delete it on you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if we just kind of with the doc, then now you've got it together, and I guess what one of the main things I want to get across with the festival is almost about a younger generation of filmmakers coming through to say, right, what can I do on basically no money at all? So where do you, once you've created a doc, and I guess perhaps going back to the first massacre, where do you then take it?
Yeah, I mean, the way I approached it was to go to film festivals first. Oddly, I spent more on film festivals than on the actual film.
Yeah.
Like the first VHS Massacre was like basically $500 movie because we used the camera. We bought hard drives really to deliver the film on. That's what the cost was. And then we hired one producer on each of the films. But, you know, I think you finish a feature-length doc, you kind of, you know, film festivals essentially are our theatrical run. So, you know, if you can do it, it's really important. And I think it still does matter in regard to what accolades you can gather when you try to approach a distribution company. When I make a film these days, because I've failed so often, I really have to have a market in mind. And that's not like a sellout thing, like the VHS, like I grew up in a video store family, but when I make a film, I have to know that there's a likely home for it. Honestly, so that's why exploitation is a good genre, because typically the topics are sensational. So you know, if you like horror and you like drama the same, I would go with the horror because it's going to be easier to find a home. But in regard to documentary, because it's a documentary that skews towards exploitation and horror, it found a home in a lot of the horror community. And so I think you have to look at that. You know, what kind of documentary are you making? And the film festival circuit, to some degree, does have a separate documentary lane. So you can enter just documentary festivals. So the one thing I will say I don't really know is if I made some important documentary about some social commentary, I might not know where to place it, because you know, some of those docs are they're just hard to make money off of. So so it depends what you make. And I guess that's my point. If you make something that's a documentary that can be associated with a genre, then you can find a home in a distribution company that puts out films similar to that. I don't know if that helps at all, but
I think it's a great point. And obviously when we were talking I guess right at the beginning when I was doing the festival and we were submitting, I was talking to you about showing this at HorrorCon, which is the other kind of festival, or the other event that I work with. And that kind of proves exactly your point. And it's such a valid thing to consider as well, because like I said, if you're making a kind of social commentary documentary, am I only going to fit into documentary film festivals? And then if there is another documentary that's about some social commentary on something close to mine, I'm limiting myself even further. So the way you've approached it, you've got a kind of wide span. I mean, we're not even a documentary film festival. We're a independent micro budget festival. You fit nicely with us. You fit nicely in the horror category. Fit nicely in the documentary category. And I think that's really good advice for people to consider as well. Certainly, and you see it as well. When a lot of people set out to make films, a lot of them will start in the horror genre, And I think part of it is because people will always gravitate to it, but then the big risk is that you do something that's been done 1,000 times over as well. So it is finding that balance. If we can kind of let's go back and talk a bit about physical media, because it's one of the most interesting things of, I guess, people, you know, I wouldn't like to guess your age, but I guess you're a similar age to myself. So
I'm 43. I don't know.
I'm 42. So there we go.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah.
So, but if you think about it, we're a generation who did grow up with VHS, and eventually there's going to be generations who kind of don't know what VHS is, and they're going to forget about what this kind of meant to people. And I think this is why documentaries like yourselves, and again, we've seen other documentaries, Rewind This and Adjust Your Tracking, that focus in on that era. Why is it that you think that people, or I guess people of our generation, are kind of going back to that side of things, and in particular now?
Well, I mean, there's a few things. Like, for one thing, I think the mass of people, that was the first time in history that they really had access to that type of library. So the video store was a type of library, a type of church where people could go in and see things that they'd never seen or hadn't seen in years. And previous to that, you had they called it the grindhouse, where they'd play exploitation films and B movies. But the thing is, a film might play in your city and then never play again, and it could be lost to time, essentially. So the video store era, I think, for our generation was incredibly potent, because at the time we could go see The Karate Kid in the theater, but then the idea of being able to watch it over and over again was amazing. And I think that's part of it. I think in a weird way, the video store was the canary in the coal mine for independent business in general. So I think, sometimes we're a little nostalgic about the concept of, hey, like, you could be anyone and just start a business, and it was possible. So I think those two things have something to do with it. Yeah, I mean, I think every generation is going to be nostalgic. I mean, I watch a lot of the American Pickers show, and the older generations fascinated by the old the tin toys they used to have growing up, and things like that. So I think that's part of it too.
So it almost feels like it's kind of a bit of a wave thing going, that I guess people of our generation mature in a filmmaking sense, in that you've gone through your 20s and your 30s learning, you're now kind of getting together. And I guess the other thing that I've noticed a lot of is kind of original video game documentaries as well, a lot of console documentaries and all that side of things. And again, it feels like a generational thing of people of our age coming together and thinking, I now know solidly how to make a film, so I'm going to go back and do something that I can really remember fondly.
Yeah, that's a lot of it, I think. I mean, there was a mystery and a mystique to going into a video store, and especially in the horror section. You'd pick up some creepy looking title. And that, that's why horror is wonderful too, because even bad horror is kind of enjoyable, whereas a bad drama is just worthless, you know? So I think that's a lot of it too. I mean, nostalgia in general is a mysterious thing, I suppose. But I think the time is right. I think enough time has gone by. But then there's still the last Blockbuster Video in Bend, Oregon. Still around. Yeah.
Is there one in Alaska, or have I kind of made that up?
There was that one. That one went under, I think, maybe last year. Yeah. But I mean, up until last year, it was one of the last two or something. I think there was one in Australia too, which I think is gone. Yeah. So I think there's one now.
And it's a funny thing because, even when I was younger, and obviously Blockbuster was over here in the UK as well, I remember not liking it that much at the time for exactly the reasons that you've covered, that all they would have is whatever, 1 million copies of Jurassic Park and kind of nothing else. But now we're kind of looking back fondly on having that thing of having a Blockbuster. And it's not necessarily about Blockbuster the brand. It's just the idea of going into a store and walking around and picking out a film.
Yeah, I mean those, and they're obviously anyone who bought the Blockbuster franchise when the corporation went under, they could keep their stores. So that's like a mom and pop store now. And I'm not like, I worked for Blockbuster for a year and a half, and it was just a matter of like, I worked, when you're a teenager, you work any job you can get. So I was working at Wendy's and Denny's, and my brother's video store chains were just too small to take on a bunch of employees. So like, when I got a job at Blockbuster, I was like, great, I'm not covered in grease. I get to, rent movies. So like, I actually have very fond memories of Blockbuster Video as a experience. It's just when you look back on it, you're like, oh boy, man, they really did a number on. So, good memories of Blockbuster as well,
And I was kind of, ironically, a friend of mine who runs a horror film festival here in Sheffield, he set up a pop-up video store just with loads of horror titles on that they just kind of got them printed out and all that side of things. And whilst I was in there, I was saying part of the problem now is if I want to see a film at the cinema, and as you know, with having young kids, you don't get to the cinema all that often. But say, for example, if I want to watch The Invisible Man, I may have to have a combination of streaming services and run the lottery of which one it's going to end up on.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that video stores brought, that you could actually go out there and actually, what you wanted and you could get it.
Yeah.
And I think that is a major problem. And I do wonder if eventually there's going to be a backlash against that side of things. I don't know what your thoughts are on it. I guess the worst case scenario is that piracy just kicks up a gear again and people just start pirating more and more.
Yeah, I think my friend James, he's a new media technology guy, and I think he was saying there is an uptick in torrenting because people are a little fed up. Like I have too many subscriptions. I have Sling, I have Shudder, I have Netflix, Prime. I want to get Troma Now, but I'm gonna have to get rid of one of those. But I do think it's I think torrenting is going to pick up again. I think that there's only one I think Sony is the only one who actually manufactures Blu-ray players right now. I think that's correct. I think Panasonic just stopped.
Wow.
And so you would think people would start buying Blu-rays of films that they thought were very important. I mean, that's what I do. I also have a PS4 and I try to buy physical media as much as possible because I know Sony's gonna do me dirty when the next gen system comes out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, and VHS has had a resurgence to some degree, which I guess I could say the younger generation too, like try weird, you gotta start trying weird stuff. Try to put a movie just out on VHS. Or try to shoot on some. I just watched The Lighthouse with Willem Dafoe.
Oh yeah,
and they shot it like 4:3 black and white. It's like it's kind of cool, like the idea of choosing different aspect ratios and styles. I don't think there's quite enough experimentation in some of the independent films these days, although there is some great stuff coming out, and my problem is I can't see everything. Like we're both dads, it's very hard to keep up. But there is some great stuff coming out. They just need to. the streaming sites, I really think if they could all add a micro budget category,
yeah,
I think that would be a great thing. And it might not be a bad thing to legislate, honestly. Requirement to take independent content. It's something that the United States did in the past, you know.
Yeah, and the kind of taking that approach with a lot of other things, because there's been such big political movements recently in various aspects that they are kind of going down those sorts of routes, and it's the same principles apply no matter what industry that you're in. You've got to give the little guy the kind of the hand up. I think Shudder is one of the streaming services that is kind of flying the flag to a degree. And obviously going back to the physical media side of things, there are a number of labels who are trying to kind of like keep it going, you know, like Arrow Video, which I know is kind of over in the States, and Severin. We've got 88 Films in the UK, and I'm sure there's any number of them that are still trying to keep this alive. Do you think there's enough people out there who want this stuff to keep it going?
I think so. I think, you know, it's shifted to a collector's market, but I think collector's markets can be still be millions and millions of people. So yeah, I think it's possible. Yeah, I was thinking there's Vinegar. There's a company called Vinegar
Syndrome. Yeah.
There's SRS Videos run by this guy Ron Bonk. Like, yeah, I do think I do think there's enough a market. Not everyone's going to make it though. I mean, that's just how it is. It could go the right way. Like it could build as time goes on, as years go by. Maybe the nostalgia builds more. It's kind of an unknown. I do think, you know, you do look at modernization and you say, okay, you know, what's the saying that the last guy who manufactured buggy whips was probably made the best buggy whip ever, you know, but it didn't matter, you know? So, I hope it's not that way. But I suppose it could be. But I think as long as there's collectors, it'll be a solid enough market.
Yeah. Because, you know, you go out there and there's still VHS collectors markets, and what's interesting is HMV, which is a brand in the UK. I don't know if it's in the US, but slowly you've noticed how the vinyl sections have been growing and growing and growing, and you can imagine one day the vinyl section will be bigger than the Blu-ray section, but then it could kind of go the opposite way, and years down the line the Blu-ray or the next kind of high definition media could just overtake that. These things do kind of have their ups and downs, and I think it comes back to what you were saying earlier about nostalgia. And people in 10 years time, 20 years time may look back on Blu-ray and just think, well, yeah, I want to get my Blu-ray collection out, and you know, we want to start trading with people, because certainly Severin label are ones that they may only put out 3,000 copies of a film, and then immediately it's a collectible, and then this is the stuff that years down the line, just like in the UK, I'm just trying to think of is it the Beast in Heat that was became so rare that it became such a massive collectible thing.
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? Like really shrewd companies who are really thinking this stuff through and make really high quality items. Then that seems like something that's going to work. Like I have stuff that I have a signed copy of The Warriors.
Yeah.
D.P. Kelly, the guy who's like Warriors, you know. You know, I have stuff in my collection that's really important to me. And you know, the concept of having a library is I often wonder if that will survive. Libraries are beautiful to look at, whether they're bookshelves or, you know, movie shelves. So that's something too. You never know. You know, I mean, the printed book is still around. It's not going anywhere, I don't think. So, yeah, things may stabilize,
Yeah, people I think will always still value that physical, that tactile thing, whatever it may be, whether it's books, artwork, or VHS or Blu-ray. So I think in relation to, I guess, the other side of the bit that you're trying to cover, and go back to the indie filmmaking side that you're talking about in the documentaries, where do you think, or where would you like to see that go? Is it kind of what you were talking about earlier about streaming services have an indie filmmaking, a micro budget kind of section that they put this on, or do you think there's another avenue that indie filmmakers can kind of go down?
It's very hard to predict. I mean, you can start your own Roku station, like you as an individual can do it. So that's not an impossible thing. For a while, they had a place that would automatically run ads and things like that. So that's a hard road, but it's at least an option. Build your own Roku station. There's often talk about these sort of independent film alliances, but they don't really seem to gain ground in the way you think they would. I think there still are, in the United States, Troma, I believe, is the longest running independent film distributor. Their catalog's 1,000 films deep. And I don't think I think it's a good option to align yourself with a label that has had a good history. Troma doesn't make a ton of money. So if you put a film with them, you're not gonna get paid.
Yeah.
Unless your movie really nails it, because that's the thing too. People don't realize it. Movies aren't just automatic money makers. Maybe there was a time where that was more likely, like in the 90s, independent films were highly profitable. But to be able to align yourself with a notable distributor is a valuable thing. I've seen a model where you're sort of not necessarily making a living off the movies, but it's an overall brand you've built. So like in the movie VHS Massacre 2, we talk about the cinema snob who has apparently made 2 features, but his sort of podcast and his the other merch he sort of has, the sort of brand package is the thing that is viable. So that's something to consider too, is this like type of brand building where the overall label is the thing that can create revenue. And I know it's complicated. Like some of us, we just want to make movies, like we don't want to have a MBA in business to manage this stuff. But I think it's just a hard game nowadays. So I think you have to think like that,
Yeah, about diversifying, about how you present yourself. And this is, I guess, social media has complicated that to some degree. I'm still a bit of a kind of social media Luddite that I don't particularly like using it. But it's just a bit of a necessary evil. Just going back to what you're talking about there with Troma, because I think that this is a bit that will kind of interest people. How is it the relationship with Troma came about, and kind of how did it build and factor into, I guess, VHS Massacre?
Oh yeah, so Troma, I had my relationship with Troma goes back to that video store era. I basically I was, well, can I tell a quick story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So the Toxic Avenger had a TV show, a network cartoon. I think it was on NBC. It was sort of a clean, environmental themed TV show, very much like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I was watching episodes of that. My friend, this is 6th grade, my friend Craig says, "Oh, come over. I have the Toxic Avenger movie." I was like, "Oh, they made a movie? Oh, this is awesome." So I go over to his house and I watch it. It's the Toxic Avenger. It's an R-rated movie with nudity. There's like a kid's head getting run over. And I was like, I love this. But it was a sort of shock to the system. 'Cause I was essentially a toddler or whatever. So that's sort of my first introduction to Troma. And I would go on to make horror films, and even one horror film, the Bikini Bloodbath Christmas, Lloyd did a cameo in that one. And so I met him a few times at conventions. When I was a teenager, I met Lloyd. And I guess sometime I put out this movie called Mark of the Beast in 2012. And man, we tried our very hardest. It had Ellen Muth in it from the Dead Like Me Showtime series. It was like a monster movie. It was this based upon this Kipling story. There's this faceless leper in the woods that put a curse on someone. And we put the movie out. It did no money. So like we lost a lot of, it did well to some degree at festivals, but we lost money on it. And to some degree, my film career was stunted. I really had nowhere to go. And I was watching all these video stores fail in front of me. And so when I made VHS Massacre, I really did make it specifically for Troma. It was sort of a hope that if I made this documentary and made it well enough, that Troma would take it. But there was no guarantee. And, you know, I didn't even call up Lloyd, say, Lloyd, I'm going to spend 2 years making a documentary. I hope you like it. I just made it. And I gave it to them, and they're like, we love it. And they put it out. So basically, that's how it came to be. I knew Lloyd as a fan for years and years and years. And then the first one came out, and some things happened with it that were really unusual. Like it went on this streaming site called Mubi.
Yeah.
Mubi was like this sort of art house thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know,
I don't understand half the films on that site. So yeah.
Yeah, and it was it really had some eyes on it. People really saw it, and again, I really had nothing going on. Where like I was like, I think I'm gonna make another one because things are worse than ever. So I'm gonna make this documentary. You know, the follow up, and this one seems to be doing amazing. Like we have 15 awards and you guys are screening us, which thank you. That's amazing. Yeah, so it's I guess, you know, long story short, too late, but that's how that came to be.
And I guess that's a good thing about, again, going back to what I want to get across to younger filmmakers. You can kind of get something from nothing and make something of it. And I appreciate people probably don't want to hear us banging on for hours and hours about video stores and our ages and everything like that. So it's probably a reasonable time to wrap up. So I guess the key thing, and it is a bit of a cliche question, but it's one that I think is important, is what is the best advice that you can give to people who want to go out and start making films?
Well, I think you have to look at it like if you are an artist, if you're a real artist, and what I mean by real is that if you kind of are compelled to do it no matter what, then you're probably going to be okay. Like if I really do make these documentaries, I think to some degree to navigate my own life, to basically have a functional life. And I think a lot of artists are that way, whether you're painting or doing sculpture or whatever. You really are compelled to do it, and you kind of have to do it. And I think as an artist, I think you're obligated to do it. I think that there's meaning in it, even if you don't see it. And so I think that type of artist, I don't worry so much about them. In regard to success, that is tough. Like if I could talk to like the 20-year-old version of me, it's like, man, you're going to have a long path. But I guess I would say, like, you know, if you keep at it, you know, eventually people will start to know your work. So go for it. But you can't do it you can't go in expecting to make a ton of money.
Yeah.
That being said, if you want to work within the machinery of the corporate system, I made a living at CBS News, at NBC Universal, IGN. You definitely can make a living, shooting and editing and stuff like that. You tend to use your own creative energy for other people's work, which can wear on you. So I think I did that for maybe 10 years full time, and then another part time 2 or 3 years. So I would say that there is a way to do that. I do think going to film school is a good idea, but I don't think that you have to.
No.
It's all about how you want to take in the information. In the United States, we have community colleges. Some of those have film schools. If you live within the state and then you go to your state college, and you live at home, it's not that expensive.
Yeah.
So there are film schools that you can go to where you're not that in debt. And what I did is I volunteered at public access television. I made my own films, and that was enough to get me a freelance, they called it vacation relief position at CBS News, where I was getting called in the middle of the night to come in and edit when people would call it sick. And then eventually work my way up. But the point is, entertainment's a really hard path. But it's doable. I don't know. Sorry if that's rambling, but
No, I think it's a good point. It's something I came to accept because I started out in my 20s at university, or late teens at university, and digital wasn't a thing back then, so you were filming on celluloid. And you do, as you grow older, you learn to realize I can't necessarily make a living off this. So you've got to accept that, and accept that I'm doing this because I love doing it, and that's the main thing. Certainly for me, anyway.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, there are those rare people who, strike gold, and some of their stories are just really bizarre as to how they got those positions. But I mean, I have friends that have stayed in the sort of corporate news world, and they've won Emmys and things like that, and so, I mean, there's a lot of success to be had, but it's a job. It's it's not a hell of a lot different than an office job,
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a key thing for me. It's do the stuff that you love and keep doing it. But yeah, it's like you said, success is hard to come by in this industry. And I think it's once you come to live with that, then you start becoming happy in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You see it as it's a craft,
Yeah.
And as long as I can keep making films and I can get them, we grew up in an era where, like, if you made an independent film and you got a distributor, that was equivalent to, like, if you wrote a book, if you got a book deal with a publisher. So, like, as long as I can, and that is a traditional mindset, but I'm still that way. As long as I can make a film and have a distributor, then I'm going to keep doing it. Although I've made a ton of web content over the years, the idea of, like, spending 2 years on something and then just, like, dumping on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not, if it ends up on YouTube eventually, fine. But the idea of starting out that way. So yeah, I'm not going to do that, but as long as I can keep, having, if your film is good enough for a distributor to then take a risk on it, then you're doing something right,
Yeah. And I think it goes back to your point earlier on about going out knowing with the idea of it's going to have a home somewhere. That's a key thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing that I just wanted to show that VHS isn't dead. I brought down one of my collection, and that's original
beautiful
pre-cert Evil Speak. So in the UK, this was one of the ones that they brought out before they brought in certification in the early 80s, and the whole Video Nasties Act. If you know the UK history of video, it's an interesting one.
Oh, is that where they put in laws to? Do you have to have things rated to put out now or something?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So that was brought in the early 80s, and there was a list of about 80 films that all got prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act.
Was Cannibal Holocaust in that?
Oh yeah, that was one of the top.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I know a little bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Evil Speak was on it as well. Yeah. There's some bizarre ones on. Yeah. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's a clamshell. That's like oh, nice.
Let me just open this one for you. So there we go.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and this is what all the UK VHSs came in. So in the US you got that kind of cardboard slidey thing that comes in. But yeah, all the UK was one of these. I wonder if I still have it. Oh, I don't know what I did with it. I had a huge. Oh, here it is. Huge. Remember I don't know if you had these things. The gigantic. Oh no.
Vampire.
I have seen them before. Yeah, and you get your plastic kind of cover where the case that the cassette sits in.
It's almost like I think this type of box is almost, you see it more with adult titles actually.
Yeah.
It's huge, Thought that was a funny one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still love it. And I'm the great thing about living in a city is that you can go to thrift stores and pick through the VHS and you find some really wonderful things. And it's a weird thing. It's become like antiquing, right? Like I can't believe like so much time has gone by, but now it's sort of like feels like antiquing to go through a thrift store and pick out a VHS,
It is, and it's a beauty of you never know what you're going to find in there. So no, it's great. So all that kind of leaves is me just to say a big thanks to you for doing this with me. And the reason I'm cutting it off now is because I feel like I could talk to you for hours about this stuff.
Anytime, man. Yeah.
And I think the people who are watching this will only want to see so long of us two talking. So we'll wrap it up and we'll pick it up another time, just you and I, and we'll have some beers and talk about this stuff.
That sounds great, man. Yeah. I really appreciate you playing the film. It means a lot to me. It's a very cool festival, and so I'm happy to be a part of it. And in the HorrorCon thing, even though it didn't happen physically, I was really psyched, So thanks for watching the thing. I mean, it's hard, when you enter festivals. It's really hard. You never know if they're even watching it,
Yeah.
So I appreciate you playing it.